Cameron Stewart of Locked On Baylor. Any surprises here that the SEC would be valued enough to have 14 teams in March Madness this postseason, and the Big Ten once again overvalued? UNC, a major brand right up there at the top, and the Big 12, even though you have Houston, even though you have Iowa State or Texas Tech, feels underseeded and left behind in pretty much every category.
Yeah, and honestly, the thing that stuck out to me with the whole Big Ten thing is Purdue. So Purdue's sitting there at 22-11 this year. They're a 4 seed. Never at a point this year where you it's a top 16 team in the country, which is what we have to kind of boil it down to here when we're talking about seeding. And you're like, oh, okay, in a vacuum, 22-11, man, they must really like the Big Ten. And then you look at Kansas, 21-12 with the ultimate name brand in the Big 12, and they're sitting there as a 7 seed. They're 1 game worse and they're 3 seeds worse? Really? Or the darlings of the SEC. Oklahoma is 20-13 in the great gauntlet of the SEC, and they're a 9 seed. They're 5 seeds lower than the 22-11 Purdue. So that's what goes to show you of the way they're thinking about that Big Ten conference. And I don't love it. And you see the Ken Palm there, right? They are a little bit higher than Kansas, but they're 2 spots higher than Kansas. And you have them as at least 9 spots lower than Kansas based on seeding. That's where I was like, wow, they are really inflating the Big Ten, who has some damn good teams at the top. But to think of where Kansas finished in the Big 12 and their conference, and where Purdue finished in their conference, have one as a 4 and one as a 7, it just baffles me. Like, what and what Big Ten run do you look at? I know Purdue made it to the national championship game last year. They were a really good team. They were 1 seed, but like, what Big Ten run by like a 4 or a 5 seed inspires this committee that every year they're overpicking Big Ten teams? And as upset as you can be with the Big Ten, I don't understand how the SEC has come to the forefront of college basketball the way that it has. I mean, to me, the Big 12 is dominant year in and year out. This has not been something controversial. 9 of the last 11 years at the top conference in college basketball. That is consistency at the very top. SEC wants to claim football. The Big 12 easily has a stake in basketball. And now we're pretending for some ungodly reason the SEC is the greatest basketball conference to ever grace Earth. And yes, if every team has a great non-conference, it's like you've set yourself up for conference play just being this darling thing where, everyone was good for 13 games, so now you can only be good for the rest of time. Like they played 13 solid games, and from there on out, the SEC got the benefit. Yeah, and I honestly, I look at this matchup that Baylor has with Mississippi State and just looking at these 2 teams, and one coasted on their conference, and it was not Baylor. You know, Baylor had one of the toughest schedules in the country this year. Their non-con was an absolute gauntlet. They didn't do very well with it, which is one thing, but Mississippi State had really 2 signature wins this year, if we can call them that. One of them was against Memphis in the non-conference. The rest of the teams they were playing were garbage, man. Like they weren't playing Gonzaga on the road. And I look at Baylor, a team that struggled all year, struggling putting a couple of wins together. And they have, again, 2 signature wins, one over St. John's in November, the other over a Kansas team that ended up faltering down the stretch. And Mississippi State's ahead of them on the 8-9 line. You know, Mississippi State beat Utah by 5 in the non-conference schedule. They played Utah, they played SMU, they lost to Butler, they played Prairie View, which, you know, Baylor plays some of those teams too, but they don't have the high end in that non-conference schedule. And kind of leading me to my point of the SEC is, like, it might seem antiquated, but should any conference ever have 12 teams in there at least, right? Like, no teams that finish 12 and 13th and 14th in your conference should be playing in the NCAA tournament. In theory, yes, they can still be part of the best 68 teams, but they've proven to you they're not going to compete at that level. They're not going to win at that level. That's how you finish 12th and 13th in your conference. That's where I maybe think too simplistically about the NCAA tournament. I would rather have another team from an automatic qualifying conference, you know, like Indiana State last year is the example I keep bringing up. I'd take that over a 12th place team in a major conference. I don't care how good the conference is. Like you gotta win those games. Those are big games. That's your audition into the tournament. And I look at Mississippi State and Oklahoma, and they didn't win those games. They finished way down. They were like 10th, I think 9th for Mississippi State, 13th for Oklahoma. That's where I'm losing the plot here. And they never, as good as the Big 12 was the last 7 or 8 years when they were putting a team in the Final Four each year, they were well respected. They were never respected that much. Yeah. I think you could agree with that. They were never respected the way the SEC was this year.
No, not at all. Even when the Big 12 had its best years, much better than what I'm seeing from the SEC this year. And multiple national analysts have asked the question, is the SEC overrated? Have we just overrated them this entire time? And the answer is probably yes here. An example I want to go to in the ACC is not just North Carolina, but also where they have slated Clemson in this thing. I don't understand how the ACC has gotten more love. I know the Big 12 got in significantly more, but the brand of North Carolina and Clemson, we're talking about them on the football side, breaking away from the ACC. Now, all of a sudden, they sniff some success in basketball, and Clemson is above BYU, and North Carolina is in with one quad, one win.
Yeah, I think, honestly, what they look at it with Clemson is they were the only team to beat Duke in the conference. And that shouldn't get you a 5 seed. Clemson's a tournament team, but it shouldn't get you to a 5 seed. Yeah. And you could, you could use the same thing with BYU, like, what we talked about in the first segment of how can two teams behind them in their conference standings be ahead of them in the seeding. And that same thing goes with Clemson. It's a much worse conference. I know Brad Brownell has his thing with the Big 12 and they knocked Baylor out last year. It's tough for me to talk on that end, but like the ACC is nowhere close. And the fact that we shoehorned 5 ACC teams in there is pretty incredible to me. Clemson, I don't know. I don't think, and I've only watched them like twice this year. I don't think they're as good as they were last year. And here they are at 5, better seed.
Yeah, I am. If I'm playing Clemson, I'm a Big 12 school. I'm not very worried. If I'm playing North Carolina and I'm a Big 12 school, also not very worried.
If I'm a team of any kind of quality facing North Carolina, anything that would be considered a quad 1 game, I'm feeling good.
I would rather face Clemson than Louisville, and Louisville drew the 8th seed out of this thing. Yeah. And the job that Lutz has done there in year 1 has been incredible. And now they're an 8th seed and going to have to fight their way past a 1 in their second round game. Coming up, Iowa State, no more Keyshawn Gilbert in March Madness. Oh, that's not good. That's really not good. This is a Locked On Big 12, Locked On Baylor crossover. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. FanDuel is the number 1 place to go during March Madness to place live bets, not just pregame, but also live. Say you missed that shot. Oh, no, I was going to bet on Baylor to win the game, and you missed it. Well, with March Madness being here and Baylor being in the middle of a game, you can now have a chance to get in on the action with live betting. New customers get $250, make it $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 extra bucks to use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories, and even who's cutting down the nets. So I've got my eye this year on some underdogs like Yale over Texas A&M. And with the tournament games happening almost every day, there's always something exciting to bet on, especially live. The FanDuel app is simple to use. When I win, I get paid instantly, no waiting around. FanDuel.com to get in on the college hoops action all tournament long with FanDuel.